Welcome back in, Clay Travis, Buck Sexton Show. We go up to Washington, D.C. right now, to the Senate cloakroom, where Senator Rand Paul, as the fury and chaos continues to descend on the United States Capitol surrounding the border and more, Senator Rand Paul is there with us. And Senator Paul, I know you're also tracking all the lies spread by Dr. Fauci and others during the course of COVID. And I appreciate you giving us some time here. I wanted to ask you just right out of the top, because I think the last time I saw you was New York City when you had your new book out, which I would encourage everybody to go check out, dealing with all the lies that we were told during COVID. Buck and I have discussed this a bunch. Your home state's a great example. Nobody paid a price for being wrong on COVID. And even in the state of Kentucky, which is a red state, Andy Beshear, who was wrong on virtually everything, got reelected. As someone who was right on almost everything COVID, and thank you for being right, how much does it disappoint you that almost no political figures paid a price at all for being wrong on virtually everything that mattered when it came to COVID?
Yeah, and you have to realize that not only was he wrong from a public opinion point of view, our governor put on mandate after mandate that was struck down by the court. The federal courts found unconstitutional his ban on travel, his ban on church, you name it. He had half a dozen edicts found unconstitutional, and you're right, he didn't pay a penalty. But I think what it shows you, at least in our race, it was about pork barrel politics. He passed out a lot of money. We had two terrible disasters, and the face of the relief was the governor. And I think this is a real mistake that politicians go around with our money and act like it came from them. It didn't come from our governor. It came from the people. And I don't begrudge the fact that we get involved with emergencies. But the governor became the face of the money, and it was as if it was his money he was bringing to the community. And I think that's how he won election. But you're right, he didn't pay much of a penalty for, sending basically state police agents to a church to take down license plates. I find that grotesque, a grotesque violation of religious freedom, banning travel, a grotesque violation of freedom, and court struck him down, and you're right, he didn't pay a political penalty, which is disappointing.
It's disappointing not only in Kentucky, but everywhere. I mean, basically every awful draconian dictator governor and or senator or representative got reelected. You are continuing to hold Dr. Fauci's feet to the fire. And scarily, gain-of-function research, which you have been very foremost in opposing, is continuing to get accelerated, and even more deadly viruses are continuing to be created. How worried are you that, as bad as COVID was, that we have created a world where far more dangerous viruses are being created? And based on the evidence supporting that COVID got out of a Chinese lab, how worried should we all be that the next virus that escapes is going to be far more deadly?
Extremely worried. We have evidence, indirect evidence, that the Chinese are experimenting with Nipah virus and with Ebola virus, both of which have about a 50% mortality. But it's even worse than you think. If you take a virus that has 50% mortality like Ebola, it spreads like AIDS through bodily fluid, so it's not easy to catch Ebola. If you mutate it and try to make it aerosolized, can you imagine if Ebola spread like COVID did with a 50% mortality? We're talking about the destruction of civilization. We're talking about going to a stone age where people are fighting for every scrap of food. There's no potable water, and civilization would completely break down with a 50% mortality. That's what we're talking about, and yet we don't have significant controls on that research, not only in China, which we have limits to what we can do to China, but we don't have sufficient controls on those experiments happening here. And the argument you'll hear from U.S. researchers are, well, the Chinese are doing it, we need to do it. If we don't do it, the Chinese are going to do it. And we need to do this to counteract it. And the arguments aren't valid, because experimenting with making Ebola or any of these dangerous viruses more potent the knowledge that you gain from it isn't worth the risk. And this is the fundamental disagreement I had with Fauci. He said explicitly that the knowledge gained from these gain-of-function dangerous research, he said that the knowledge gained was worth the risk, even if a pandemic occurred. And I think the millions of people who had loved ones that they lost, I think would disagree with Anthony Fauci, and yet he was given a Medal of Freedom honor as he left,
Senator Rand Paul with us now. There's a lot of things going on. When you hear Joe Biden claim that he bears no responsibility for what's going on at the border, and in fact Republicans are to blame, as he said earlier this week, how do you react?
Well, the facts are the opposite. He abdicated from 94 executive orders that Trump had put in place to control the border. Trump had control of the border, objective control of the border. Biden voluntarily got rid of all of those orders, and the border's a mess. He also went to the Supreme Court just 2 weeks ago to get permission to cut down the borders that Texas is erecting. Texas is putting up razor wire and cargo containers as a makeshift wall, and they appear to be stopping the influx. And he went to the Supreme Court to take it down. So it's laughable for Biden to say, oh, I just need more power from Congress. He has the same power as Donald Trump had, and Donald Trump closed the border. So it's a fallacious argument, and it should be laughed out of public view. But the goings-on in the Senate and the Senate Republican leadership have allowed this to happen because they put forward a border bill that isn't any good, wouldn't fix the border, and now that almost every Republican now is going to come out today and vote. Right now we're voting on the floor, vote against this. Now the Democrats are all saying, oh, we gave them a border bill, it's perfect, and they're all leaving it. It was never perfect. It's worse than the existing law, and the existing law actually Donald Trump used to close the border. So this fake border bill has always been a pretense for getting more money to Ukraine. Mitch McConnell's sole desire is to fund Ukraine. That's all he wants to do. It's all he cares about. He'll do it at the expense of an elaborate ruse over the border, which turned out to be fake reform, and no conservative will end up voting for it.
Senator Rand Paul with us now, everybody. And Senator, on the issue of the funding and where it stands within the Congress right now, with the supplemental drama going on, what can you tell us about where that goes? What do you think is going to happen here with Ukraine funding, with the supplemental funding for Israel, with the border funding, all of it?
There's going to be a series of key votes, and they're happening right now. The first vote is over whether or not to get onto the bill with Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel, and then also with the fake border bill that doesn't fix the border, that makes it worse. Almost every Republican is going to vote no, and they won't have enough votes to get on that bill. When that fails, Schumer is immediately going to put forward a bill minus the border provisions. And my proposal, and I spoke at length at lunch today, was that we shouldn't give up on the border, and that what we should do is counter that we're already in emergency. One of the main problems of the border bill is it says you have to get 5,000 people a day till you get to an emergency. I think the emergency is we just had 700,000 people come across illegally in the last 2 months. The emergency exists, and we shouldn't have a trigger. The trigger should be zero. The trigger should be one person coming in illegally. So I think we should counter to the Democrats with a real border bill. There's an H.R. 2 in the House, which goes a long way towards this. There are real provisions that we could put in place. But instead, our leadership, Republican leadership, is going to go along with Schumer. And here's my suspicion. All the Democrats and then about 10 of the big government Republicans, led by our Republican leadership, is going to vote to get on the next bill because they are so concerned with sending your money to Ukraine. And people need to realize it's all borrowed. We don't have any extra money. There is no rainy day fund. There's no money sitting around. The money they want to send to Ukraine, for good or bad, is all borrowed. We can't afford to even pay for the stuff we have. Our entire budget is borrowed. All the entitlements consume all of our tax revenue. 2/3 of spending is entitlements. Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, Social Security, that consumes almost all of the tax revenue. Everything else is borrowed, $1.5 trillion each year. And so it just isn't fiscally conservative to send money to other countries unless you take it from somewhere else in the budget and they're unwilling to pay for it.
Senator Paul, what do you think about I think it's $17 billion that is supposed to go to Israel? People are asking, I've heard it, more lately than I have in other times where this issue has come up. Why are we sending so much money to a country that is a wealthy country?
I think the argument has some validity to it. Their per capita income rivals the United States. They're a country that actually hasn't asked for more aid. We give them $2 to $3 billion a year every year. I will say, though, that even I compromised because they've been a good ally and said, even though I think we do have to worry about the dollars, I said I'll vote for it, and I did support it paid for. Take away the IRS, all that extra money they threw at the IRS, billions of dollars. And that's what Johnson did from the outset. When he became Speaker, he put forward Israel aid paid for. We brought it over here, and we pushed it forward and forced a vote. All Democrats voted against it because they despise so much of being paid for. And paying for it, it makes it, to me, at least more acceptable. But I won't vote for it unpaid for, even for Israel. Look, I think we're a great ally. I've visited Israel. Good people. We have a lot of kinship. And but at the same time, we have to be concerned about our country and our debt, so it has to be paid for. And so this bill to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan will be unpaid for.
When it comes to these different funding issues, what do you think is the best realistic outcome from your perspective, given where we are with all the supplementals and the wrangling around it?
I think the main thing is not to capitulate on the border. This first vote, we're sticking together and saying the border bill's inadequate, doesn't shut down the border, and it won't do anything other than give political cover for Biden. That we're sticking together on. But for the Republicans, and this is what I said at lunch, for the Republicans who are going to go along with Chuck Schumer and Biden on the second vote, it's actually going to be an identical vote. If you look at the vote, we're going to vote on a shell to get on a bill. It's not really a bill. So we voted against the shell because they were going to put the border and the Ukraine money together. We didn't like the border bill. It was inadequate. They're going to vote about 30 minutes later on the exact same bill, but then they're going to say, oh, no, we're going to put a replacement on a clean bill with just Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan money. But the best outcome is don't give up on the border fight. We still should be, and we should talk about endlessly about Biden has gotten rid of all of the provisions that Trump used to control the border, and that the law is the same. How come Trump could control the border and Biden can't? What power does he need? And if we were to give new powers, they have to be powers that acknowledge the emergency already exists. It shouldn't be that you wait for 1.8 million more people to come in before you say, oh, well, if we had more than 5,000 a day, then we're at an emergency. One illegal is an emergency. And the bill was worse than that. It said when you got to 5,000 a day, we'd stop the illegal border crossings, but we'd still allow migrants to come through the ports of entry. So there'd be no limit. All 5,000 more could come through the port of entry instead of illegal. All it does is pushes them from the illegal entry to the legal entry, but still doesn't mean we should accept or can take, a couple million migrants every year.
Senator Rand Paul, everybody. Senator, appreciate your time, sir. Come back soon.
Thanks, guys.